Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and this is a review of episode 12 of the Orville called The Mad Adultery, which is also the season 1 final. And sadly, Patrick Stewart did not appear in this episode. I know that they actually filmed another episode for this season, but they delayed it till the next season. The episode which was supposed to be the season final will be the beginning of episode 2. So maybe that's the episode he will appear in. So I guess we'll see him in season 2. And some other Trek actors are also rumored to appear, Scott Bakula. And even Dennis Crosby, who played Tasha Yar in TNG, said that she would love to appear on the Orville.
It wouldn't be Tasha Yar, but I have met with those guys about doing a part on the Orville. So, I think that Seth is a big Trekkie, so I'm sure he'll find something, for us if we can do it.
So I'm guessing we'll see a whole bunch of cameos in the future as well. But sadly, in this episode, we didn't see any cameos. And there's something funny. Before I actually watched the episode, I looked up on YouTube other reviews of it. I saw one guy who's making reviews of the Orville. I saw in a thumbnail of his review of this episode, I saw Brent Spiner in the thumbnail. And so I thought maybe there was a surprise cameo appearance by Brent Spiner. And so I didn't watch the review, I watched the episode immediately, and I kept expecting to see Brent Spiner. And it generated some funny theories, so I'll get into it once I review the episode. And he did not actually appear in the episode. I think that guy actually confused him for someone else. There was someone in the episode who looked very similar to Brent Spiner, so I guess he thought that was him. So when I saw that character, that priest guy who looked like Brent Spiner, I kind of realized that's probably the guy that that guy thought is Brent Spiner. But even after that, I kept expecting to see Brent Spiner show up. So there was a scene in which Isaac went down to the planet and lived 700 years on the planet, since time was moving faster on the planet. So I half expected him to upgrade himself during that time and make himself look more human, and maybe when he comes back he will look like Brent Spiner before changing back to his normal appearance. That would have been very funny, but it didn't happen. But anyway, let me start my review from the beginning of the episode and go chronologically. So the episode begins with Ed feeling lonely, and he's paying social visits to his crew members. And we see that on the Orville they have a night shift, and most of the crew go to sleep at the same time apparently, which is something we always saw on Star Trek, and I was always kind of making fun of that because it doesn't really make sense. Would there really be a night shift on a starship? So that's something I always found a bit funny in Star Trek. So anyway, Ed tries to socialize with his crew, and that's something Picard would never do, except that one episode in which he was replaced by an alien and came to a poker game. But other than that, he always kept a distance from his crew and tried not to get too close to them. And so Ed is kind of doing the opposite, and there's a funny scene in which he tries spending time with Bortus and Clyden, and they play a little game which ends painfully for Ed. And this was such a Klingon moment that it really made me laugh. From the beginning, Bortos was kind of like the Worf of this show, and his whole culture is kind of similar, even though it's different enough to make it original and fresh and funny in its own way. And Klingons always play those very brutal games. For example, arm wrestling always ends with someone's hand getting pierced by a knife, and they have knives on both ends, so whoever loses, his hand gets stabbed. And so we always saw stuff like that with Klingons, so I found this really funny. And also they enjoy a prune juice kind of drink, which apparently contains some parasites which they enjoy. So stuff like that really made me laugh, because this is like Star Trek, but way over exaggerated to be really funny. And after this, Ed meets up with Kelly, and they think about restarting their relationship. And immediately I thought about that TNG episode in which Picard fell in love with a fellow officer, and after he had to order her to risk her life on a mission. After that he decided he can't be in a relationship and work with her in the same time. And so I half expected Kelly's life to be in danger in this episode, and maybe even that she'll die in the end of the episode, which would be a very dramatic, sad moment for Ed. And there were some rumors that someone's going to die, so I expected it to be Kelly. And I knew they definitely will not end up together by the end of the episode. It's only season 1, it's too early for that. So anyway, the next morning Ed and Kelly are hungover from having drinks last night, and when they see a sun on the screen they find it too bright and ask to reduce the illumination. That also kind of reminds me of a TNG episode in which Picard found the sun to be too bright even though he wasn't drunk, at least not to our knowledge. And after this they encounter a planet which shows up from nowhere, and at first I thought maybe the whole planet has a clocking device, like the planet Aldea in TNG, But apparently it's more like the planet Meridian in Deep Space Nine, which was periodically shifting to another dimension. And so we have the same kind of thing here. So this planet basically exists in two universes. It stays in our universe for just a few days and then it moves to another one. And while it's in the other universes, time passes differently. And when it comes back, it's 700 years later for the planet. And so this is similar to the Voyager episode In the Blink of an Eye, which was about a planet on which time is moving much faster. And so Voyager got to observe that planet developing from primitive society to advanced society in the course of the episode. And obviously they had an impact on the planet and so on. So it's a very similar kind of scenario in this episode. So they go down to the planet and Kelly accidentally makes contact with the primitive people and accidentally frightens a girl who falls and gets injured, and then Kelly heals her with her device, and some witnesses saw that. And right away I was thinking about Who Watches the Watchers from TNG, in which Picard accidentally started a religion based around him by making contact with the primitive people who saw their advanced technology and mistook it for magic. And so right away I knew it would be the same kind of story. And so the Orville crew goes back to their ship and the planet disappears, and when it reappears it's 700 years later for the planet. And of course there's now a whole religion centered around Kelly as their god image. And apparently there is the same kind of prime directive rule designed to prevent this kind of thing, just like in Star Trek. And Ed tries to protect Kelly by not reporting her actions to the Admiral. And there's a really funny moment in which Ed makes fun of the Admiral before realizing that the comms is still open and she still can hear him. And this is the kind of silly humor that would never be in the actual Star Trek show, but I love this kind of humor, so I loved it. And so they try to fix the situation on the planet on which people are now being killed in the name of Kelly, in a sort of inquisition. So Kelly goes to the head of the church to try to explain the truth to him. And this is exactly like those scenes with Picard trying to convince the primitive people in Who Watches the Watchers that he's not really a god. So we have a very similar scene here. And I don't mind recycling old ideas as long as they're being done better than before. But honestly, the scenes in TNG were done much better than what we see here. Here it feels kind of like a cheap imitation of that. In TNG, that scene with Picard explaining that to the primitive woman, I think that was one of the best scenes in Star Trek. And the music in that episode was amazing. And the acting by Patrick Stewart was amazing, obviously. And so here it's kind of like a pale imitation of that, honestly. And I still love the show, I'm just being honest in comparing it with some of the Star Trek episodes that they are imitating. The originals were much better in many ways, and so I'm just being honest. And it would have been so funny if Patrick Stewart played the role of that Pope guy, because it would be like exactly the reversed role this time. On the other hand, I'm glad we didn't have any cameos, because it would have been distracting from the actual scenes. And if, for example, Brent Spiner was playing this Pope, I wouldn't have been able to take the scene seriously at all. I would just be going, Data, Data.
Help me put the fish back on the plate.
Data, Data. Engage.
What is it, sir? What do you want?
Data, where's Crusher?
So maybe it's a good thing we didn't have any cameos. Now, overall, the scenes were good, and the ideas, of course, are good, but they're just not as good as in TNG, which was done just so brilliantly. First of all, it was much more original then, and also the acting by Patrick, as I said, was just, you cannot top that, and the music was perfect in those scenes, really some of the best music in Star Trek. So overall, I have to be honest and say that this doesn't feel as good as in Star Trek. So anyway, she manages to convince the Pope of the truth, and after she leaves, he gets assassinated by one of the other priests, because that guy wants to continue to basically rule his people in the name of that religion, and so he knows if he cancels the religion, they will no longer be in charge. So that was very interesting, obviously poking fun at religion, showing that maybe the heads of the religion don't even believe it, but they still keep the religion, simply to maintain fear and control over the people, the kind of stuff that really happened in history and what we see in this episode. So when the planet reappears again, it's now 700 years later again, and then now it's like modern day humanity, and this scene was basically a parody of today. So it's a nice social commentary on humanity, once again, maybe a little bit too obvious, a little bit too on the nose, but overall good. And I wonder if some religious people will be offended by these kind of messages. I don't think anyone ever got offended by Star Trek, because Star Trek was always showing everything, in such a rational and correct way. I don't think even religious people got offended by it. So I don't think they would be offended by what we see here on the Orville. I think any rational person will agree that religion was used negatively in our history, that organized religion was often used to manipulate people, to control people. So even religious people would agree to that, I think. I think any rational person should strive to find the truth and not to seek to control other people and to force other people into your religion, and not to punish other people physically for thought crimes and stuff like that. So I think most rational modern day people will agree with the messages of this episode and wouldn't get offended by that. But let me know in the comments what you thought about all of this. If you happen to be a religious person, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So anyway, during this episode, I kept thinking, why do they even bother trying to correct anything in this civilization? Because, even if Kelly never visited that planet, they would still probably believe in some other god with some other face and name. So what's even the point of trying to convince them that she's not their god? It's kind of pointless. They'll just have some other religion to fight over. And that is something that was mentioned later in the episode, which did make Kelly feel a little bit better. So that was a nice scene. I'll get to it. And before that, Kelly wants to go down to the planet again to try to convince them again that the religion is false. And she's willing to stay on the planet basically for the rest of her life to accomplish that. And so I almost thought that's how it will end. I thought it will end with basically her going to the planet and living the rest of her life there and dying there, which would be a sad ending, but at the same time not so sad, because she would actually get to live a full life just on another planet and not with Ed. So that would be kind of a bittersweet ending. So I really expected the episode to end that way, but instead Isaac volunteers to go down to the planet because he doesn't age and he would be able to return to the Orville after the 700 years. And that also reminds me of that same Voyager episode I talked about, Blink of an Eye, because in that episode the holographic doctor was sent to the planet and ended up living there for a few years before getting back to Voyager. And it also reminds me of the time that Data's head spent 500 years lying in some cave before getting reattached to Data. So we see the same kind of idea here with Isaac spending centuries on another planet and then coming back as if nothing happened. So when Isaac stayed there for 700 years, I thought maybe with the new advancements in technology on that planet, maybe he'll upgrade himself to look more human. So maybe when he returns to the Orville, he will look like Brent Spiner, which would have been really funny, but sadly it didn't happen. Like in that movie Bicentennial Man, in which Robin Williams played an android. That was a pretty good movie, by the way. And in the end of that movie, he basically upgraded himself to look like a human. And so I almost expected that to happen with Isaac, which would have been very interesting. Maybe they could have used this to kind of upgrade him to a more human-looking android, and maybe looking like Brent Spiner for a short while before returning to his normal look. So anyway, the civilization on that planet is now as advanced as them, maybe even more advanced than the Union. And they now visit the Orville. So this is very much like the ending of that Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. And I really like that scene in which they tell Kelly that she doesn't need to apologize, because even if it wasn't for her, they would have some other image of a god. They would have some god with another name and face. So they would still have the religion because it's part of the normal development of any culture, which is exactly what I was thinking when watching it. And so I'm really glad they addressed it. So it was a nice ending to the episode. And because of everything that happened in this episode, because Ed lied to the Admiral to protect Kelly, they decide that it's a bad idea for them to pursue a relationship while serving together. So this is the same as in that episode in which Picard fell in love with an officer, and in the end of that episode they decided not to serve on the same ship since it caused so much trouble. And so here they all stay on the same ship, but they simply decide not to be together, not to pursue the relationship, and to remain at a distance. And so it's the perfect ending for this episode. I don't think it's a good idea for them to be together on the show, because if they're single, it opens up more possibilities for the series. Just like Troy and Riker couldn't get back together during the series, they only did that in the very end, in the last movie. And in this way, both of them were kind of free to pursue other relationships during the series. So I guess they're doing the same kind of thing on this show. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. However, I did feel it was a little bit too unoriginal, because it was so similar to so many other Star Trek episodes. And I'd be fine with that if they improved the ideas, if they did them better, but honestly, I don't think they were done as well as they were done in TNG, for example. Simply, you cannot top the acting by Patrick Stewart and that brilliant music in that episode, so I don't think they could have done anything better than that.
I wish you good journeys, Picard. Remember my people.
Fuck you.
And also I feel like some of these Orville episodes, they feel a little bit rushed, like they try to cram too many things into one episode, and so some of the ideas don't really get developed properly as they should be. And I think it's been a problem in a few episodes. Some of the episodes had a lot of brilliant ideas, but they kind of rushed through it, and they didn't really fully explore that idea. Especially that one about the starship in which the people inside thought that's their whole universe. That was kind of a brilliant idea, but they didn't really explore it properly as they could have. So sometimes it feels a little bit disappointing because they could have really done more with the idea. And so I kind of felt the same about some of the things in this episode. And about all the silly jokes in the episodes, I kind of like them even though they're kind of childish a lot of times. But it still adds a lot of fun to the show, so I like that. So overall I love the show, I really do, but it's not perfect. But I still say that if we compare the first season of the Orville to any first season of any of the Star Trek shows, the Orville is relatively much better than any of those shows were in their first season. And so I still think the Orville has the potential to be maybe even better than Star Trek in the long run, if they continue to be good. If this show improves like the Star Trek shows improved, I think the Orville might be much better in the long run. So sadly, season 1 is over, so it was a great run and I can't wait for season 2. And I will probably be rewatching some of the episodes again and maybe do some more reviews discussing specific things in the episodes which I want to talk about and overanalyze like I enjoy doing. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.